I'm Cheryl Chumley. This is Bold and Blunt, giving you a Christian conservative view of news, politics, culture, and events. Alex Traiman, thank you so much for being here on Bold and Blunt. It's great to have you.
Thank you so much for having me, Cheryl.
CEO of Jewish News Syndicate, JNS.org, and you are also the bureau chief for Jerusalem coverage. Tell me what you're seeing on the ground, and really, geographically speaking, where are you and your family right now?
So we're in Jerusalem, which is really smack in the middle of the country. The Gaza Strip, by contrast, is in the southwest corner along the coast. So the areas around the Gaza Strip were the ones that were hit so horrifically on Saturday during the Simchat Torah massacre, in which we're learning now that it's over 1,200 killed, and that number is still likely to grow. And when Hamas starts firing rockets, because they're along the coast, and also most Israelis live along the coast in coastal cities from Ashkelon to Ashdod, all the way up to Tel Aviv and to Netanyahus. So when Hamas fires their Qassam rockets, since they're not sophisticated weapons, they fire them up mostly up the coast because, if they just shoot in the direction where most people are, if it goes longer or shorter, it's still likely to hit a population center. So there's been a few volleys towards Jerusalem, most of those volleys intercepted by the Iron Dome system, which shoots down the incoming rockets at an incredible clip of 90 to 95%. But when you're talking about over 10,000 rockets fired at Israel in the last week, you could imagine that even if you're 90% successful in shooting down rockets, that there's still going to be hits, and there have been several.
So go back in time to when the attacks were first launched, when the terrorists first launched attacks. Where were you specifically? Were you asleep, in bed? Did you hear the thunder of the attacks? How did that go?
Yeah, sure. Our family was by friends in the Jerusalem suburb of Efrat for this Jewish holy day, which is a Simchat Torah. It's a Jewish festival. It's when the Jewish people finish the annual cycle of reading the Torah. And we had gone in the evening to synagogue. It was very festive, and we were planning to just wake up to festivities in the morning, getting ready for synagogue. And I started to hear something in the distance. And I said to my wife, it sounds like air raid sirens coming from someplace. It wasn't in the town where we were staying, but I identified it as sirens. And my wife said, maybe it's just an ambulance. I said, I don't think so. I think those are air raid sirens. And then sure enough, we started to hear some booms in the distance, which were the interceptions of the Iron Dome hitting these rockets overhead. So every time the Iron Dome does intercept a rocket, you hear like a very large explosion. And then sure enough, within about 15 or 20 minutes of then, we had no more questions as to what we were hearing, because the air raid sirens were going off in the town that we were. So yes, we had to wake up our children and take them down barefoot and in their pajamas into bomb shelters and wait to see what would happen.
So on the streets now, what are you seeing? What are you hearing? Israelis prepare for this from early on in life, right? They know that they live in constant danger, but this seems an unprecedented attack. Over here, it's being likened to our September 11th. So what are you seeing on the streets right now? What is the tone and tenor of the discussions, what people are saying, and so forth?
Well, in Jerusalem, there's a quiet calm right now. There's tension. You're not seeing as many people out on the streets as usual. Children are not in schools across the nation, so that means that parents are staying home, working from home. But in other parts of the country, it's obviously much more hectic. Still in the south around the Gaza envelope, there are still terrorists roaming about. I mean, the IDF has already killed 1,500 terrorists in southern Israel, but there still are a few rogue that are being dealt with. In the north, you have entire communities that have emptied out almost completely, expecting there to be a barrage of missiles and potential infiltrations from Hezbollah entering Israel's northern border via southern Lebanon. and in Tel Aviv area, where rockets have been fired almost nonstop for the last 5 days. You have people running in and out of bomb shelters every time the air raid sirens are going off. So, even though we're trained for this moment, as you said, this is probably the worst moment that Israel's experienced, maybe since the Gulf War in the 90s, when Saddam Hussein was firing Scud missiles at Israel. And the tension is as to whether the IDF is going to send in a massive ground incursion into Gaza, because they've called up over 300,000 reservists. That means that everybody in Israel, basically has a father, a son, a husband, a daughter, or a good friend that's called up into the military right now. And so there's a lot of tension as to whether our boys and girls are going to be racing into a booby-trapped urban war environment. So there's a lot of nerves there, and we just have to see, what will be the next steps. Nobody really knows exactly where this is going to go.
How concerned are the Israelis right now that there are still members of Hamas and maybe even Hezbollah or some other plants from Iran funded to commit atrocities in Israel? How concerned are Israelis that there are people wandering about in the streets now secretly?
Well, it's not a secret. That's the whole thing. Yes, there might be a few lingering terrorists that cross the border, but when you talk about inside Israel, Jews live together with Arabs in Judea and Samaria. Judea and Samaria has been a hotbed of terrorism over the last 2 years, really a steady increase in terror attacks. And there was just a terror attack this morning, just a couple of miles from Jerusalem at a checkpoint leading from Efrat into Jerusalem, where somebody was shot by a terrorist. So there are terror rings that are in Israeli population centers. And then you also have the Israeli cities where you have Arab citizens of Israel or Arab permanent residents of Israel. Just 500 yards from my house is a very large Arab community, and it's the seam line between the Jewish neighborhoods and 250,000 Arab residents of Jerusalem. And we've seen it various times back in 2014 and other times that these populations can get stirred up. And so there is the tension that it might not just be fighting with Hamas in Gaza, not just with Hezbollah in southern Lebanon, but also with all these terror factions in Judea and Samaria, and even inside Israeli population centers like Jerusalem, Ramallah, Lod, and others.
What's being said about Netanyahu right now? Are people confident in his leadership, or are they regarding him as a failure because of intel that wasn't put out there to stave this off? What are people saying about Netanyahu?
Well, absolutely. I mean, people are so upset that this terror attack was able to happen. I mean, we have a multi-layered defense around Gaza and the border, specifically to prevent these types of incidents. It's clear that the government didn't know about the chatter. I mean, this was a massive coordinated attack that would have been planned for months, and there was no knowledge of it. And then not only that, but even when you had tractors and other signals coming that the border was about to be breached, the defense was nowhere to be seen. And not only that, for hours, terrorists were running around southern Israel, and that's how they were able to kill over 1,200 people and injure over 3,000 more and kidnap over 150 people. They were able to kidnap Jews from communities near the border and then take them back across the border without being intercepted through the same holes that they poked in the fence to come in. So it's a massive, massive security breach, and I feel pretty certain that heads will roll at a certain point. However, the time for the heads to roll, the time for that analysis is really not today, because we have hundreds of thousands of Israeli troops lined up along the Gazan border awaiting command to enter the Strip. And we're in the middle of a massive bombing barrage. As we speak, the members of the government and the opposition are talking about formulating a unity government. We're 5 days into the conflict. How come the unity government wasn't formed on the first day? There's a sense that the politicians are not putting their egos aside when people's lives are on the line and when it matters the most. But at the same time, we can't judge the outcome of this conflict yet. Yes, it's like Hamas kicked an onside kick and scored a touchdown on the opening drive, but the game's not over. And I think that it remains to be seen what the results of the battle will be before determining exactly how badly Israeli leadership failed or whether they actually passed their tests.
So looking at America, how are Israel's regarding America in terms of being concerned or secure in America's allied response to Israel? Because I'm sure you're aware as well that Joe Biden didn't come out and make strong statements in support of Israel until well after the attacks. How concerning is that?
Well, I think that the statements coming out of the Biden administration since the attack on Saturday morning have been strong and correct. But the problem is, what were the policies leading up to those statements? I think that what we're seeing here is the massive failure of the policy to put pressure on Israel to make land concessions to Palestinians, right? The Gaza Strip was the pilot project of an independent Palestinian entity. Israel removed 8,500 citizens from within the Strip and 21 vibrant Jewish communities and took out all of its military infrastructure, handed the territory over to the Palestinian Authority. They were immediately overrun, and Gaza was taken over quickly by Hamas. And, we've had maybe 100,000 rockets fired at us since that time in 2005, and numerous attempts to infiltrate the border via tunnels and other attempts. So this is just the outbreak of a very bad policy leading until now. And then the other part of the failed policy is the funding of Iran. I mean, Hamas is one of Iran's terror tentacles in the Middle East, and so is Hezbollah. And Iran is the main supplier of money and weapons to Hamas, to Hezbollah. And so just a few weeks ago, the Biden administration gifted $6 billion to Iran in exchange for 5 American hostages. Well, guess what? Today, Hamas, which is Iran's terror proxy, has 150 hostages and $6 billion. And so while Biden has said the right things in the opening moments, and they've also sent the USS Gerald Ford aircraft carrier over to the region, I think the main test for the Biden administration is how long will they have Israel's back? Like, they say they have Israel's back right now because it's clear to the entire world that Israel's the victim of a barbaric massacre. But the tide is already turning because Israel's bombing massive barrages in the Gaza Strip, and the death tolls very quickly are going to add up to the point where there's going to be way more dead on the Gazan side than there were on the Israeli side. And will the Biden administration stand by Israel to finish the job and completely dismantle Hamas? Interesting that Barack Obama tweeted 2 days ago that America stands squarely with Israel as it dismantles Hamas. So that has to be the goal, to take Hamas out completely, not just as a rogue terror organization, but also as a pseudo-governmental agency. And the question is, from the Biden administration and the rest of the world, will they support Israel until that operation is complete?
You bring up a good point about the $6 billion, because, of course, that is being disputed by politicians of various beliefs and ideologies here in America. The left basically defends the $6 billion and says not a penny of it has been sent. It's still being held in Qatar and so forth. And, of course, the right says that doesn't matter, because once the $6 billion is put out there as available, whether now or in the future, it frees up those with terrorist intents to commit their terrorist activities. And you bring up a very good point about the hostages, because among those hostages are, I think it was the latest headline I saw, 20 Americans. And where do you see this White House going in terms of doing more dealing with terrorists to get Americans back? And how would that impact Israel's safety and security going forward?
Well, if America just gave Iran $6 billion for 5 hostages, I guess they're hoping that America will give Hamas, $25 billion to get back their 20 hostages. That's how America deals with the situation. Right now, we've heard that Hamas is threatening to start executing hostages, and and to be taking pictures and videotaping the execution of hostages in the same way that we've seen horrific, barbaric footage of Hamas terrorists, beheading Israeli soldiers, parading the bodies of the dead that they've killed, and beheading babies and other things. Some of the videos aren't even being released that they have. It's so terrible. But I think that if Hamas would do that, even though every life is worth so much, and Israelis care about every life so deeply, and they want their children back home in one piece. In some cases, their grandparents back home. They took elderly people on wheelchairs as hostages into Gaza also. If they start to execute hostages, I think that will perpetuate the momentum for Israel, where the entire world sees just how barbaric and inhuman Hamas acts, and that would actually give Israel more backing to finish the job. If Hamas says, we'll give you back the hostages, then there's going to be more pressure on Israel to stop.
There has been some strong support for Israel issued in terms of statements around the world, the UK, Germany, and a few, of course, America. But at the same time, there's been somewhat of a muted response from countries in direct geographical proximity to Israel. Is that a concern, or is that just expected? Because certainly you guys have been through this before. Is that a big security concern to Israel right now?
Well, it depends which countries you're talking about. If you're talking about the Abraham Accords countries like the Emirates and Bahrain and Saudi Arabia, which has been in negotiations to normalize with Israel, well, they're watching to see what Israel does here, right? One of the main factors that led to the formation of the Abraham Accords has been the fear of a nuclear Iran. And here you have Iran's main terror proxies, Hezbollah and Hamas, threatening and attacking the state of Israel. What drove these countries to normalize with Israel was the belief that Israel was the only power in the region that could protect against a nuclear Iran and its tentacles and provide safety and stability in the region. So these countries are now looking very carefully to see what will happen. Will Israel decapitate the tentacles of Hamas and potentially take out Iran's nuclear infrastructure? If Israel does that and proves itself to be the strong horse in the Middle East, the regional superpower, then I think that you'll see the normalization with Saudi Arabia move forward, faster and stronger. But if Israel cowers to Hamas and allows it to score some kind of a Pyrrhic victory or other, I think that would have a very negative impact on the future of the Accords and normalization with Saudi Arabia.
Speaking of the hundreds of thousands of reservists who have been called up and are standing ready as we speak, what does that do for the economy of Israel? Because, these are reservists. They have normal jobs Monday through Sunday and so forth. What's going on in terms of the economy right now of Israel?
Well, I think that depends very much on how long this lasts. If there's a prolonged conflict, it will definitely have an impact on the economy. We're already seeing the Israeli economy taking a hit since all of the divisiveness over judicial reforms in Israel. And you had the left in this country, the opposition of the judicial reforms, basically lobbying business leaders and others to take their money out of the country, over the reform package. So we saw that the shekel's already lost value, and now, of course, the shekel's losing more value. Anytime there's instability in the region, the shekel loses value, and people and businesses are afraid to invest. But again, it depends on how long this lasts and what's the reaction. If Israel wins, people like a strong player. If Israel emerges as a strong player after this, there's no fear about the economy. If Israel makes mistakes and they lose, and then the world turns against Israel and said that they went too far, but they didn't win at the same time, it could have a very negative impact on the economy.
Alex Traiman, I have to wrap it up here. Alex Traiman, CEO of Jewish News Syndicate, JNS.org. Check out the work there. I appreciate your time and stay safe. Hope to touch base with you again soon.
Thank you so much, Sharon.